Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
All right, good. You guys got the hint. Hey, I was hoping that this would be a little bit of a discussion. And my role up here is to introduce this topic and how important it is to our national economy, to our national security, and talk a little bit about the vulnerabilities that exist and enlist your help in either helping to identify those vulnerabilities and close them, or in helping to protect this industry. And we have good folks that are working on this. We have good folks wearing the uniform in the Coast Guard on our cyber protection teams. We have good folks in the industry that are doing things to lock down the vulnerabilities in the maritime transportation system. But since this is also a professional venue, and it looks like we've got some of the senior professionals here, maybe a few young folks, let me just tell you real quick my story, right? So my story, I grew up in the 1970s and 1980s, and I was that kid sitting at my dad's high school banging away on the computers because that's the only computers that existed, writing Pong and doing all kinds of stuff like that. When I went off to the Coast Guard Academy to get a degree, they didn't have a computer science program. They had a math and ops research kind of program, and that's the one that I fell into. When I showed up at my first ship in 1991, I was an assistant engineer officer, and the chief engineer didn't know what to do with this math ops research guy. And he said, hey, there's something that's in your office sitting on the desk there. Can you figure out what to do with it? And it was, of course, a personal computer. It still wasn't running Windows because we hadn't deployed that at that point. But ended up writing codes and software for the ship to calculate damage stability in real time and do stuff like that. Fast forward a couple years, I end up writing software for the Coast Guard in the early 90s, and we were shutting down the whole of the services. We would want a peace dividend with the Soviet Union's downsizing everything. And so who were the ones that were getting passed over the most and getting kicked out of the service? All the software guys, all the IT guys, all the computer guys, because it was new. And the admiral that was in charge of that program came down to give us a pep talk at the Software Development Center and said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go get a master's in computer science. This was about 1993, and I want to help the Coast Guard with the computers. He said, whoa. He said, I'm in charge of computers. I don't even have one on my desk. The Coast Guard doesn't need any officers that know anything about computer science. It's not important. Go find an operational job, right? And so I tell that story for a couple of reasons. One, because I think that our cyber community is still very much an emerging field, and it's going to change and continue to evolve. And there's not going to be a cultural home for it unless you create it. And you're going to have to expect to hear no many times throughout your career as you continue to evolve. But what I can also tell you as I tell that story is because the worst career advice I ever got was from a Coast Guard admiral. So please take what I say with a grain of salt as we go forward here, and spread your bets and ask other people what's going on. And use that to help inform it. But you guys are going to be trailblazers. You guys are going to be leaders. You're going to help us think through and operate effectively in this next environment, and that's why this is important. So DaVinci virus. Anybody understand DaVinci virus? Know what it is? Time frame? All right, this was when hacking first kind of came into the collective conscious of the US. And what was the target of the DaVinci virus? Anybody know? All right, we're going to get into all of this then. So, all right, so DaVinci virus, here's what it is. You have a major corporation, and they have hired a former hacker to be their CISO, essentially. CISOs didn't exist at that time. He's working on the computer system, and he comes up with a scamming operation, right? Or skimming operation. And he figures he can take a couple of cents off of each one of those transactions that this large corporation is making, and he gets and puts that money in a bank account and is rolling in the dough. And people are starting to catch on to him, and so he creates a virus that is attacking the PLCs on the company's super tankers, on the ballast control system. So you understand, if you're a big ship floating in the water, you need to maintain, neutral buoyancy position and stay afloat. And if you can screw with that ballast system, then you can capsize the ship. And so he develops a virus that he allegedly is going to deploy out to the ships to sink and capsize the ships and cause all this damage. All right? And if it weren't for these really smart kids from Stuyvesant High in New York City, led by Angelina Jolie and her colleagues, this, would have been disaster for the world. But this, of course, was the movie or the plot for the movie Hackers, right? And if we look at what was happening in the nation, in the industry at that time, this was 5 years after Exxon Valdez had coated Alaska's coastline with oil. And people down in the lower 48 saw pictures of oiled birds and oiled wildlife and were horrified. And then Exxon executives went on TV and they were embarrassingly greedy and uncaring about what had happened. And so there was this large kind of reaction against these big companies, and these big oil spills seemed like a big deal. But I can tell you, at the time that it exists, with the state of technology in the industry at that point, this was science fiction, right? If you go back to this notional diagram up there, yes, there were mainframes, yes, there were satellites, yes, there were PLCs on board supertankers at that time. But the connection that made this particular exploit work in the movie or not work because of those great kids that broke it up just didn't exist at that time. All right? And so you can see kind of, back in the 1990s time frame, we still have a big wooden wheel there. We still have a lot of pneumatic and manual controls. But if we fast forward to today, we understand that ships are highly networked, integrated, coordinated from the various control systems down in the engine room and the cargo rooms on board, all the way up through the navigation systems. And if we look at why that's happening, it's happening for a number of really important reasons. One is the business case, right? The desire today is to have that ship so connected it is an extension of the physical office there. And why does that matter? It matters because as ships are moving across the water, or they're loading at terminals and discharging at terminals, they are exploiting these minor price adjustments in the commodities that they're carrying. And one move, one day, can make the difference of millions of dollars. And so being able to optimize that and make that work from an operational case is one of the reasons that it's happening. But it's also happening because of the regulators. The regulators are saying, hey, you have to reduce your environmental impact. And so that's going from static regulation, which is, hey, let's go out and inspect the fire main and make sure that the fire pump turns on, and we'll do that once a year, to real time. I want to know what the CO2 is coming out of your stack every second of every day that you are in operation. And so that requires a lot of sensing, that requires a lot of data, that requires a lot of communication. But it's also happening because the business models are changing in the industry, because what happens when you have this uber connectivity with the ships, if you're a GE or a Wärtsilä, a big prime mover maker in the industry, instead of selling a one-time engine to them and not recouping, and that's the only cost that you have, you build the engine, you sell it to them, and then the deal is done. Now what you can do is you can sell them the power output from that engine. And so I can continuously, if I'm GE, and I'm working with a big ship owner now, I can just say, hey, I'm going to sell you, the power output to the ship. I will monitor that. I will control all that stuff for you. And all you're doing is buying output from me. Where else have we seen that model in our day-to-day life, right? Office setting, think about copiers, right? We used to buy the copier, and we used to buy everything that came with it. Now all we do is we buy printed pieces of paper. Right? We have a lease, they take care of all the equipment, they take care of all the machinery, all that stuff. And so that's the kind of model that you can get when you have uber connectivity. And so what's the challenge? You guys know this. Sorry, you guys know that, hey, if you got more endpoints, you got more entry points. And so one of the things that, as I talk with naval architects, I liken this to how you design a ship, right? Any hole that you put below the waterline in a ship is a really big deal when you're designing that ship, right? Because any hole that you put in the side of the ship is a potential flooding point, right? Potential problem later on during existence. So you only put enough holes that you need for the absolute operational efficiency, and then when you put those holes in there, you protect them, and you make sure that you have really good valves that you can shut. You make sure that you maintain those valves, and then you make sure that you monitor those valves. And so as I talk with the industry, I talk about this analogy because I want them to think about their network and their nodes in the same way. I'm sure you guys all get this. You guys know this story in terms of, one of the key challenges that we all face is offense only has to be right once, defense has to be right all of the time, getting after it. And we have to make sure that we're resilient because it's not a matter of if, but when. So what are some of the experts in the industry saying about this? And if you're interested in what's happening in the maritime industry, these are two great reports in terms of what's going on. The first one is put out, or the Coast Guard one is written by Coast Guard Cyber Command. The other one is written by an industry association. But what they're saying is, hey, this idea that we used to rely on and what everybody would say is, oh, don't worry, that equipment's air-gapped. It just doesn't exist anymore. That doesn't exist on the ships that are serving out here today, except for the oldest of ones that are out there. We're also seeing that once you become an extension of the office, because you're so highly networked, what else happens, right? When the office gets hit with ransomware, the ship gets hit with ransomware. And how that cascades through the network can be problematic. And then there are real costs associated with these breaches, but unfortunately those costs aren't sufficient enough to really change behavior in a meaningful way. So that's kind of, the bad news. The worst news is, hey, when we go out and we survey the maritime industry and we spend time looking at their networks and looking at what's going on, guess what we find? Default credentials, 70% of the cases, right? And so that's indicative of the fact that this is an industry that just hasn't yet embraced the need to protect these networks and take the necessary steps. Same thing, OT networks, not segmented, and then it gets to the point that, folks don't know what they're gonna do after they've been hacked because they're not doing the exercises. And so there's a series of regulations and standards that have come out. Sorry. We're getting there. There's a series of regulations and standards that have come out at the international level within the industry because a lot of the standards that happen within the maritime industry are driven by vetting decisions. So if you're a big oil company and you may own some ships, but more than likely you just hire the ships to transport your oil. And when you make a decision about whether or not you want to hire them, you send out some surveyors and you do a vetting. And so cybersecurity is starting to come into some of that vetting. But none of that is mandatory in a way that is meaningfully changing the behavior. And so the Coast Guard earlier this year came out with a set of mandatory cybersecurity requirements for both the ships that carry U.S. flag and the port facilities here in the U.S. And it's based on the NIST framework, and you all understand what's in the NIST framework, and you all understand, each of the steps within that framework that you can take to drive this forward. And then it also has a mandatory reporting element. And there are great partners. We have great partners here represented at MCPA. These are some of the different organizations that I work with. I'm particularly hopeful of seeing some of you out at DEF CON later this year because we'll have a Maritime Hacking Village set up. We've got a bunch of different Capture the Flag events that are going on there to earn some creds and really help us understand some of the vulnerabilities. We've got undersea communications, we've got autonomous, and we've got port infrastructure and operations too. And so it'll be a great opportunity for that community. But the point of this slide is really that, hey, we know how to get after this problem, we're just not getting after it. Oh, and by the way, those mandatory regulations only apply to less than 1% of the global fleet that's out there transiting, right? And so why is that important to us? Well, everybody remember the toilet paper crisis of 2022 when we couldn't get toilet paper in our grocery stores and on our shelves, or the different, supply chain, and you heard about those tankers, the container ships stacking up off of LB. The world's goods and our goods all move on foreign flag shipping, and so we need to make sure that we apply these standards and we get after it in a meaningful way. I would tell you here that, again, the standards, if applied, are effective, and if the companies think about this as an operational risk, that they can also be effective in driving down the risk. But that isn't happening. And one of the reasons that isn't happening is because the cost of non-compliance just isn't there. NotPetya, you guys probably all know about NotPetya and the cost imposed on Maersk, about $300 million. Maersk has made some really big changes as a result of that. But when you're feeling $5 million hits per the Coast Guard report, it's just not enough to make the change. And then we also know that assigning liability in this space is really difficult as well. I used CrowdStrike from last summer as that. CrowdStrike wasn't a cyber hack. I think you all know that. It was a patch that was applied, shut down the internet, shut down Delta operations. Stock market reacted and cut 44% of the value off of CrowdStrike in a matter of a couple of days because they thought that liability would be assigned and there would be a huge financial payment that CrowdStrike would have to make or whatever. We know that within about 3 months, the stock price went right back up to where it was, and now it's, I think, up about 422, which is almost 100% from the low. And so liability in this business is really hard, and liability is shipping is really hard. And so we've seen this before. I talked briefly about Exxon Valdez and the challenges that we saw in 1990 when Exxon Valdez ran aground, and there wasn't a single responsible party for that spill. And so we created a legislation that identified a single person responsible and then required some physical measures as well post 1990 or post Exxon Valdez, and rolled them together into the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. The green line shows what the curve would have looked like in terms of number of oil spills for the decade that followed OPA 90. Had there been no legislation and rules enacted, and the red and blue lines show what the actuals were. So the industry is getting after this in some ways, and the way they're doing it is bringing insurance and risk analysis together in a way that is pretty meaningful. But this is a really new innovation. They're pairing cyber risk with SOC services and risk assessment services, and it seems like a good way to get after it. But again, only the proactive actors are going to do this. So what I was hoping to do was get some of your thoughts as we think about how important this industry is. $5.4 trillion to the U.S. economy goes through our maritime transportation system. It creates jobs for 1 in 7 Americans. It literally is how we put food on the table, how we put shirts on our back, shoes on our feet, but it is also how we project power around the globe as an armed force. And so we need these ships. We need this industry to work well throughout. So thoughts and questions? Comments?
Question over here.
Please. Yeah.
I have a question. When you think about an adversary attacking the commercial maritime domain as
Yeah.
as a way to impact one of their adversaries,
Sure.
one of their enemy, if you will. Are there ways to target that such that it only impacts, like say if you're China and you're going after the U.S., is there a way to like target your work that it only impacts the U.S., or is there blowback on the attacker, and do they even care about that?
Yeah, so I think that there are ways to set up the attack so that you could attack certainly a particular vessel, a particular company, a particular fleet. But like any industrial industry, there's a ton of common equipment and common use equipment across the industry, and so if you do something or you do a denial service or attack or attack like NotPetya, there's going to be blowback across a wide segment, not just the maritime industry. But some of the things that we see, kind of happening today. Or we see wide area GPS denial or GPS spoofing, which messes with the navigation systems on the ships in both the Red Sea and Strait of Hormuz. 3 weeks ago, the MSC Antonia was a victim of GPS spoofing and ran aground in the Red Sea off of Saudi Arabia. Just a little over 2 weeks ago, 2 tankers collided in the Strait of Hormuz. There wasn't GPS denial going on at the time, and they were line of sight, so they should have seen each other. But they had both been victims of GPS denial in that area. And so those are the types of things that are happening kind of today, every day, interfering with the ship's abilities to navigate safely. And of course, we're right here in Baltimore. Dali was not a cyber incident. But we can see that if we can affect the propulsion, if we can affect the safe navigation of a vessel, we can cause consequences to a region, not just to the ship itself.
That is similarly true for an attack on a particular port.
100%.
I live in Charleston, made multiple efforts to engage the port.
Yeah.
And there's a very clear sort of, this isn't my thing, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It struck me dumb to think that here we are in 2025 with headlines every single day.
Yeah.
We're still running into people who are like,
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I think what I'll say about that one real quick, but I would love to follow up with you on that particular one, because I think we've got some opportunities and insights, and would love to have a more private conversation with you. But what I would say in general is, these big owners of this infrastructure, operators of this infrastructure, came into the business because they had a real estate advantage or because they had a labor advantage. And if that's why you're in the business, then you're probably outsourcing much of your IT automation, OT, right? If you're at a port that automation is your advantage, and there are a few of those in the US, not many, but there are a few, then you take this very, very seriously. So it's part of that culture, part of that organization. Yeah, challenge, please.
I don't know the human resourcing of a ship, but
Yeah.
I can't imagine that a lot of these companies want to pay for IT specialists to work on ship full time.
Yeah.
But outside of hoping and praying that you're able to remote into your ship if it gets taken over, should companies be looking at staffing at least a couple guys for major movements?
Yeah, I think here again it depends on kind of what the commodity, how important that is. There's plenty of industrial processes that sit well remote from where the IT and OT folks are. And one of the big trends that's happening in the industry is going to more automation, fewer humans on board. That's a continuing trend. And so I think that they need that expertise. Whether that expertise needs to be on board 24/7 is a different problem. Within the Coast Guard regulations, they call for a single individual, the cybersecurity officer, that has accountability for that mission. Yeah.
I have a question for you as well.
Yeah, please, thanks.
Interesting, because Coast Guard obviously falls under DHS, but you also support the DoD, and there's different authorities, obviously, like that. How does that really impact a lot, and where do you see some of the, like, the benefits to that and the weaknesses? Like, I know you mentioned about the cyber regulations, for example.
Yeah. So, after the Admiral told me not to pursue a career in cyber or in computers, I went in and got a master's degree in engineering and spent the bulk of my career working with the maritime industry as a federal regulator. A different career path for somebody that wears a uniform, but it gave me a chance to really work and understand this industry. So we have Coast Guard teams up here at the fort doing Title 14 missions. So you have Title 10, Title 50. You also have Title 14, which gets some customs authority, which gets some other law enforcement authority, which gets them focused on some other opportunities. Sitting on CNMF, sitting side by side, and that blend of Coast Guard authorities is how we get after other national security missions. It's how we get after smuggling in the Arabian Gulf. Right? We'll put a small Coast Guard law enforcement team on board a Navy asset. When it's time to do the boarding, they'll drop the Navy ensign, they'll put up a Coast Guard ensign, put that ship under the command of the Coast Guard lieutenant, and they'll do the boarding and they'll get it out. And that's the same concept that we brought to Cyber National Mission Force in terms of the operations. Put some coasties on your team, get their authorities, go after it, and get it done. But it also allows us to work very closely with CISA. We're fully embedded in CISA. As we talked about this morning, this is a team sport. This is all about the partnerships and working across the agencies. We also have great relationship with the Guard. And when you look at the Guard's authorities and where they said, it's another great opportunity. Yeah, they care very deeply about the local economy in their state and the security of the port. And so we work very closely with them to make sure that we're getting after it. Good, we got time for one more. Sir, please.
Yeah, you mentioned the price is not high enough for the companies to be worried about cyber. Is that just because people aren't going after it yet and it's going to be a concern? Or do they just not realize the price that it's taking on them? I think it's a little bit of both, probably more of the latter. Okay. Right? Yeah, there's certainly folks out there that are exploiting that. The word is getting out around the industry. I mean, they just, tens of millions of dollars to refloat Antonia and get her fixed, and not to mention all the cargo loss that happened during that voyage, everything else. The word's getting out, but it's just not happening fast enough in a way that's changing behavior. Okay. Fair enough? What I was, wondering about. What's the message we need to tell people to get them to realize the full cost?
Yeah, I think it's part of that overall cultural and business operations. If we can translate this into a financial risk, then we'll see a better uptake on it. Hey, thanks so much for what you do out there on mission each and every day and your time this morning. Appreciate it.